everyone. So, welcome again. And nice to see you all here. Nice and diverse crowd. I guess that's what you're supposed to expect in New York, is that right? Diversity. So that's wonderful. And I think actually to me it's always one of the strengths of a monastery or a particular Buddhist society, if you have a diversity, because everyone comes together in unity and harmony, instead of splitting up into subgroups, which humanity is very good at. We come together, and I think this is a very beautiful thing. So I'm very glad to see the diversity of people here today. It's really positive. And the talk tonight is going to be on how to... Oh, you're leaving already? We're just starting now? Okay.
I'm having difficulty hearing. I want to get close to you.
Great, okay. Should we put on the microphone?
Yes, maybe we can.
Yeah?
Come talk it up and
Okay, yeah, maybe do like that. Oops, falling off. Okay. It's nice not to have to shout, so it's kind of just wherever you want, not kind of in a good place, yeah. Okay. Yeah, great.
There's a button on the top. There should
All right.
be a light on.
Yes.
Right. Aha, it's working. Okay, that's much better, isn't it? I don't have to shout. That's good. So the talk tonight the talk tonight is going to be on how to recognize whether something is the word of the Buddha or not. How do we know this? How can we have some guidance on when someone is talking nonsense? It's kind of bad for me tonight, right? You're going to test me on this straight away, right? You're going to say, so please, if you think I'm talking nonsense, tonight you're allowed to say so, because this is the topic of the talk. So to say, excuse me, Venerable, but I'm going to walk out now. And this was a topic suggested by Venerable Soma, and it's actually, so I'm very happy to talk on that. Sometimes it's nice as a monk to get some new inputs, because you usually talk about exactly the same thing every time, right? But now it's kind of a slightly different subject. And it is one of those things that is very important in the Buddhist teachings. It is very important because the assumption as a Buddhist, I don't know how many of you kind of consider yourself Buddhist, or whether you just consider yourself interested in Buddhism or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But the idea is that as someone who is inspired by the Buddhist path, we want to know where the real teachings are, what is actually authentic. And a lot of the things that you hear in the world we don't know. Yes, there's someone saying some random stuff, and we wonder, where's it coming from? Is it coming from purity? Is it coming from ego? Is it coming from whatever? But there's one thing that we have to assume in Buddhism, and that one assumption is that we have to assume that the Buddha knew what he was talking about. Because that is the foundation of everything. If the Buddha didn't know what he was talking about, we are in deep trouble, right? That's not what I mean here, basically. That's kind of foundational for this whole path. So that is the assumption. So because that is the assumption, whatever anyone says, whoever they are, whatever authority they may have, whether they're called Bhante, Venerable, Ayya, Rinpoche, Master, these are all the kind of titles that we give to people in the world. Whatever they're called, it has to align with the way the Buddha taught. Otherwise, it's kind of empty, it's problematic, and then we don't know whether we're getting the real deal, whether it is authentic Buddhism or what is the opposite of inauthentic, dodgy Buddhism. I don't know what the right word is, but it's not so. So we need some kind of guidelines to see this. And I remember one of the things that came to mind when I started to, I always like to think a little bit about what I'm going to talk about before I give a talk. And one of the things that came to mind was a conference that I was at in 2012 in Perth. That's where I live, in Perth, Western Australia. Far away from here. It's about almost exactly the opposite side of the globe, actually. I can't get much further away from Perth than New York. So I think someone said if you drill vertically straight down from New York, you get out exactly at Perth. That's interesting. And so we had a conference there in 2012. I happened to be the very last speaker at that conference. And of course, all the speakers, this kind of usually at Buddhist conferences, they have kind of some slides up, right? And everyone has a quote from the Buddha, right? Because you have to kind of, this is how you make your speech authentic? Yeah, it's not quote from the Buddha. Who knows what's going on there? And so I looked at those quotes. No, that's not really from the Buddha. And there was one quote after the other, one speaker after the other, right? And there was, after the end, not a single one of those quotes that was on the Buddha. And I was kind of despairing. So I got, and my talk was going to be about something else, but I said, no, the first thing I want to say is that all these quotes on the Buddha, there's not a single quote from the Buddha on this conference. And I knew that it was a problem, right? I knew that this was kind of rife in the world with no kind of people saying Buddha quotes and actually not being accepted. But I didn't know how bad it was until I was at this conference that I understood how really dodgy it is. And so for this reason, I think it's actually incredibly topical to talk about this because it really is a big problem. And one of the, there's actually a very nice website available that you may have seen called Fake Buddha Quotes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you know that one? Yeah, it's a website dedicated to this thing. And you can actually, what is very nice about this is that you can write into this fellow, his name is Bodhipaksha, and you can write in this, and actually I've got this thing that is supposed to be a Buddha quote, what do you say here? And you can actually get it authenticated, yeah? So after the talk tonight, you can send in the transcript of the talk. No, don't do that. There's going to be too much headache for this poor fellow. So you can send it in, and then he will kind of look at it. And a lot of these things, they kind of look, yeah, maybe the Buddha said this, but it's hard to say sometimes, right? It kind of looks ballpark right. It's very hard to know. And so he then traces these things back and looks at where they came from. And he kind of looks at whether there's anything in the suttas, in the Buddha's discourse, that looks like this. I don't know exactly how he does it. Maybe he kind of has all the suttas in his head and kind of matches or whatever, not sure what he does. And very often, 90% of the time, it turns out to be, no, it wasn't the real Buddha quote. Occasionally it is. And sometimes it's fascinating, because sometimes I like to think that I know exactly what the Buddha said. I can kind of spot a fake Buddha quote like that. But sometimes it's actually quite hard. Because sometimes it depends on how you translate, right? And you can translate in ways that are kind of modern and still right, yeah, but they're kind of modern. They sound like the Buddha didn't say this, but actually he said something like that. So you have to be, so it's kind of a bit tricky to decide which way it is sometimes, but that is kind of a good starting point to know whether something is a Buddha quote or not. But what we need to do is we need to have some kind of guidelines, right? How, if you come across a Buddha quote, if you don't have time to send it into fake Buddha quotes, what do we do? How do we kind of have some idea whether this is right or not? And I want to give you some ideas. Actually, I did some homework before, so I went to the fake Buddha site and I kind of got some of those quotes. I'm going to read them out for you afterwards. I'm going to test you. Test you to, it's too loud, is it? Test you to see if you know whether it's a Buddha quote or not. I'm going to see how good you are at these things. But before I do that, I want to give you some guidance, so that you have some guidelines, so that you can actually test test those guidelines up against these quotes afterwards. So some of these guidelines, one of them that is very obvious one, if something sounds too modern, it's not the Buddha, right? If something it's kind of obvious. And by modern, something like this was something I found on this Bodhipaksha's website. He said that this just sounds too neat and too literary. It sounds like someone has put together this beautiful little phrase, really nice and beautiful. It's very neat and fits in with kind of our modern sentiments. It's a little bit too much. Okay, then quite likely it is dodgy. The Buddha's teaching is perennial. It is a teaching that is always basically valid, right? The Buddha said that he discovered the nature of the mind, discovered the nature of reality. If it really is about the nature of the mind, it shouldn't make any difference whether people are here now, whether they are in a different culture, whether they are from a different time. All of that is really irrelevant. It should relate to everyone. So it is not a modern saying, it is a perennial saying. That's what we should look for in the Buddha's teachings. Something that is always kind of relevant. Sometimes clinging is good.
It's beautiful players.
Great. So the Buddha's teachings are perennial. They are also like general, as I said, applicable to everyone. They're not kind of someone is left out. The Buddha's teaching doesn't apply to you, but they apply to you. No, that doesn't work like that. They apply to everyone. So you should see something that is actually, that has this kind of feeling that it kind of goes across cultures, it goes across time, it goes across all of these things, and everyone is really included in this. And this reminds me of one of the kind of the qualities of the Buddha and the way he teaches the suttas that I always found very fascinating. Because what the Buddha says when he teaches the suttas, he says that he sets in motion the wheel of the Dhamma, the Dhamma chakra. And what does that mean? What is the wheel of the Dhamma? The wheel of the Dhamma is like this teaching that has a certain momentum in the world, right? Once you kind of put these teachings out there, people think, yay, there's something going on here. There's something kind of really good about this. And because they feel that, they carry those teachings on to the next generation. They carry it on to another culture. They carry it on to a new era. And now, lo and behold, this here in New York. Isn't that wonderful? And it kind of carries on like this. It's the wheel of the Dhamma because of the power of these teachings. They have a momentum that keeps it going in the world, keeps it rolling on in the world. So because the Buddha, when he says that he's setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma, what he is saying is that he knows that this will keep on going, from culture to culture, from people to people, from era to era, from, everywhere. He's aware of that as he gives his teachings. And what that means is that the people in front of him are only part of the audience. We think that when we hear the teaching of the Buddha, we think, okay, he's teaching to the audience in front of him, because that's how normally a teacher teaches. But the Buddha has a much grander scheme in mind. He knows the power of these teachings. He knows they're going to carry on in the future. So he phrases these teachings in a way that are universal, that are applicable to everyone. And this is what I found so fascinating. I was born in Norway originally, kind of far away from the land of the Buddha, ice cold, and there's not kind of a Buddhist in sight. When I grew up, there were no Buddhists in Norway when I grew up. Now there's a few more, right? And how on earth could it speak to me? Well, the reason it speaks to me is because it speaks to the human heart. It speaks to each one of us. We all know greed, hatred, and delusion, right? Is there anyone here who doesn't understand greed, hatred, and delusion? Well, like you're an arahant, you are graduated, you can leave. You are in business. So it's all there. It is all speaks to us in a very kind of real way. And I found that so very interesting when I read that, because I knew if that is the case, it means that the Buddha is my teacher in a very real way. He was thinking about us, right? Not literally each one of us, but he was thinking of us as people coming into existence in the future. Not coming into existence, that's the wrong way of putting it from a Buddhist point of view, but being here in the future, listening to these teachings. And so that means that when you read the words of the Buddha, he's talking to you. Because he knew this is going to happen. This is what the setting in motion, the wheel of the Dhamma, is all about. So when you read, next time you read the suttas, anyone here read suttas? Okay, I guessed that already. Dad, okay, good. I was going to ask you what you're, are you Kachan?
Yes.
Okay, I thought that, I can see. I thought that when I heard the question earlier on, I thought this is the one. So I thought I'm going to see you here. That's good. So it's sometimes you have kind of all these connections before you come somewhere. So that's really cool. So when you read the suttas, if you ever do, or you hear a real Buddha quote or whatever, and these perennial teachings and all of that, then remember that the Buddha is teaching you. He's your teacher. He was thinking about you, when he gave these teachings. And when you think like that, when you read the suttas, you actually start reading the suttas in a very different way. You kind of get touched by these things. You think, he's teaching me. It's not just some kind of ancient Indian audience 2,500 years ago. No, he's teaching me right now. You read it in a different way, because you start to read it, trying to feel the compassion, feel the kindness, feel the wisdom behind the words in a very different way. He's now thinking of me. He's trying to give me information. Okay, what is he trying to say here? You kind of try extra hard to understand what is going on. You look at every word may have a meaning in this text, and it changes your attitude to these things, and you start to get a connection with the Buddha. And that's powerful, and it's actually very important. one of the very important things in Buddhism is the idea of Buddhanusati. Buddhanusati is recollection of the Buddha, right? What does it mean? Well, it means really that we want to create a relationship with the Buddha as our teacher. And you think in this kind of way. There's much more you can do to think Buddhanusati. This is one way of thinking about this. So you can imagine if the teaching is for everyone, everywhere, any culture, any time, it's got to be pretty general, right? If it kind of fits too much into the American context, or the Western context, or the modern context, or whatever, then already it's kind of a little bit dicey, a bit uncertain. So this is another kind of important aspect of these teachings, and one way of kind of deciding whether something is authentic or not. Another thing which I always found very kind of important for myself is that the teachings in this are very down to earth. I know sometimes people like these kind of very fancy teachings, flowery teachings, are kind of, are all over the place and with lots of fancy phrases and all of these kind of things. But I have always personally preferred that are down to earth, that are realistic. When I feel I'm listening to some real person, someone could actually have said these kind of things. And this is one of the strange things that you find in the history of Buddhism, is that often the further away you get in time from the Buddha, the more flowery very things often become. I don't know if you have, it's kind of fairly well established that the Mahayana suttas came sometime after the Buddha. And of course, if you read some of these Mahayana, they vary quite a lot, but some of them are incredibly flowery. Or if you read some of the later Pali ideas, there's things that comes in the kind of elaborate stories of the life of the Buddha. It's called the Jataka Nidana, the source of the Jatakas. If you look at some of these things, it can be very, very flowery. You see the Buddha being described in ways he's not described in the suttas. Suddenly the Buddha becomes not just a kind of a fairly ordinary person. Suddenly he's this prince who is supremely wealthy, who had everything in his life, and he lived in the capital, was the biggest city in India. Now you go to Kapilavatthu these days, it's kind of this tiny little village, and you wonder what's going on there. That's kind of the feeling. It all seems a bit. So I like the stuff which is ordinary here. Okay, the Buddha. He obviously grew up in a well-to-do family for the time. He had many of the luxuries of the day, but it wasn't really fabulous. It was reasonably ordinary, and by modern standards, certainly it was ordinary. So this is what it says in the suttas. And this is what the early suttas, what I would consider the early suttas, say, compared to the later things that are really fabulous and amazing and flowery and all kind of things happening. And sometimes you can see this development actually within the suttas themselves. We have this, what is called the four Nikayas, which are usually considered like the mainstay of the teachings of the Buddha, right? But even within those, there is a bit of kind of variability according, the degree of authenticity is going to vary a little bit. And you can actually use these kind of ideas even within those suttas to come to some kind of conclusion whether something is authentic or not. And occasionally you come to suttas that have, a lot of kind of ticking many boxes. Okay, this word is from the Abhidhamma, this is a copy of how things were done in later suttas, this is very flowery, and then you read, this is actually very rare, but occasionally it happens. And then you think, okay, maybe this is some kind of later thing that has was added at some later point. Happens very occasionally. The sutta I have in mind, if you are interested, is Anupada Sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya 111, which has kind of many of these characteristics. Especially, it is very flowery. So down to earth, simple. The meditation that we do, the one that the Buddha really recommends the most, and the one that the Buddha himself did through his awakening, was mindfulness of breathing. Nothing fancy. Not a lot of imagination, not kind of these kind of big ideas in the mind that tend to sometimes go astray, but something which grounds you, brings you back to reality. Doesn't kind of take off into some kind of, strange realm or anything like that. This is the Buddha's way of teaching, keeping things very simple, down to earth. And this is how I see for me, is a marker of authenticity when it's simple and down to earth in this way. But then the last thing, which to me is the most powerful maybe idea behind all of this, and which really kind of makes the Buddhist teaching stand out, and that is that it is profound. It is deep. It is not kind of ordinary, right? Some of these things that you see as Buddha quotes, they're just too ordinary here. Yeah, it's kind of too, okay, it inclines you to kind of do the same old things that you did before. It doesn't really challenge you in any way, right? The Buddha is about renunciation. The Buddha is about giving up attachment to the sensory world. Now that is really challenging. Yeah, it is really challenging, but maybe he has a point. And that is what is interesting, of course. So the Buddha's teaching should be challenging. And if the Buddha's teaching don't challenge you, they don't have much point to them, right? Because that's kind of what the spiritual path should bring you somewhere. It should take you somewhere. It should not confirm all our prejudices. It shouldn't confirm all the things that we already kind of are attached to in this world, because then it doesn't have any point. So the Buddha's teachings are therefore about things like, giving things up, moving on the spiritual path and finding kind of true joy and happiness through a different way than we normally find things in the world. That is what it is about. We should expect it to be profound in this way, about achieving states of meditation that are beyond anything that we ever thought was possible in our life, and maybe even insights going in the same way. It's profound, it's deep, we should feel challenged. And I know a lot of people in this world, what they want, I want to have all my pleasures in life, and I also want the spiritual life, right? This is kind of how people often think. And although that is true to some point, you can of course live like that to some point, the Buddha takes us beyond that, outside, he goes further. And this is what is so fascinating about his teachings. So now I have given you the key to knowing what may be the word of the Buddha. So now I'm going to test you. Are you ready for the test? Yeah? We're going to see how sharp-witted you are. So actually, I forgot to show you one thing. This was really important. Actually, I wanted to show you this one. I'll tell you what it is if you can't see it. So I was in San Francisco before I came here, kind of the heart of Silicon Valley, and I went to one of these meditation centers. There are heaps of meditation centers down there. And I kind of came to one meditation center, and they were very much into the early Buddhist text, authentic Buddhist teachings, right? And the fellow who runs that meditation center was fully aware of all the fake Buddhist quotes that are, flourishing everywhere in the world. So he had this kind of poster on the wall, and the poster on the wall is kind of a Buddha quote, and the Buddha says, "Pretty sure I never said that." It's pretty cool, right? It's really kind of, this is from the IMC, Inside Meditation Center. So, I'm really glad people have a sense of humor in Buddhism. That's really cool. Okay, so here are some quotes, dodgy or perhaps not, right? First one. A family is a place when minds come in contact with one another. Yay or nay? No. Wow, you are. Okay, that's a good start. Yeah. That's not how it doesn't have any meaning, right? What does it mean? They come in contact. I'm sure they come in contact with another. It's nothing to do with spirituality. It's kind of maybe it's a nice kind of feel good thing, but not sure about anything else. Okay, next one. A sweet friendship refreshes the soul. It's too obvious, right? Yeah, it's too bleeding obvious. No one would fall for that one. Because, soul is kind of the exact opposite of what the Buddha taught. Yeah, so it's kind of obvious one. But these are called Buddha quotes, right? So let's just give you some idea. Okay, a generous heart, kind speech, a life of service and compassion are the things that renew humanity. That's a good one. Could be. Okay. So who everyone thinks it's a good one? No. Okay, they have. Okay. Right. No. Okay. Some yays, some no's. Okay. Yeah. Well, the no's are right, unfortunately. Yeah. Because the Buddha is not really about renewing humanity. He's about getting rid of all this mess. So yeah. But good. I'm glad you kind of at least you took a stand, which is good. Yeah. So yeah. Okay, another one. How many of these should we do? Okay, well, there's an endless number. Okay, all descriptions of reality are temporary hypotheses. No, exactly. And I think this is a very important point. And one of the subjects of talk that the Venerable Soma asked me about was to talk about the difference between having no views and right view. Yeah, we're not going to talk about that now, but this is an opportunity to talk about it anyway. Because this description that all descriptions of reality are temporary hypotheses, it seems to say that there are no real views, right? Nothing is really right, just temporary, it flows through, there's no real reality under this. But this is not what the Buddha is saying. He's saying there's right view and there's wrong view. And he's saying that someone who attains, has a deep insight into reality, becomes dittipato, which means attained to view. Right? You attain, in other words, you have the insight, the vision of the Buddha. You see things according to reality. So there is no views is kind of wrong. But what the Buddha does say, and this is interesting, and one of the kind of the some of the early Buddhist texts that are very often quoted and people really love around the world is called the Atthakavagga, the chapter of 8. This is in the books called the Sutta Nipata. Have you heard about that? Yeah, some of you have. And in those suttas, in a few of them, it says this idea that you give up all views. Yeah. And this is one of those controversial things, and it's one of these things that you have to interpret with a lot of care not to get it wrong. And what it means, and this is kind of what it comes down to in many, many places in the suttas, is that you give things up in the sense that you don't hold on to them, you don't grasp these things. This is not something that you kind of rely, your life depends on having this view. This is my dogma, and if this is wrong, then everything is kind of falls apart. We don't grasp things in that way. So if someone tells you that rebirth is wrong, then you don't need to kind of fight with them over that. Okay, whatever, I don't actually know, to be honest, at the end of the day, but I trust the Buddha had it right. So something like that. And so this is really what we're supposed to do. It's not that all hypotheses are temporary. Actually, some things, the reality has to be in a certain way, right? It's not the world function a certain way. Either there is a rebirth or there's not. It's kind of the both is and both isn't. That doesn't make any sense. That neither is. Maybe we come up with some alternative hypothesis. I'm not sure. That neither is rebirth, nor isn't rebirth. Or no, that gets too complicated. So we stay with the simple things. Okay, let's go on to the next one. This is an obvious one. I think it's too easy for you guys. You are too well educated. But anyway, all things are perfect exactly as they are. And it's very anti-Buddhist. How can anyone say that's the word of the Buddha, right? I mean, come on. This really haven't got a clue. Okay. An idea that is developed and put into action is more important than an idea that exists only as an idea. It depends what the idea is, right? It's not just any random idea. As a candle cannot burn without fire, so humans cannot live without a spiritual life. So you can see it's kind of obvious very often, right? It's not that hard to figure out. I mean, some of them are more ambiguous, but these ones are pretty obvious. As you walk and eat and travel, be where you are. Otherwise, you will miss most of your life. Okay. Okay. This is maybe a more interesting one. Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, no matter if I have said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense. But this is like an alternative version of the famous thing in the Kalama Sutta, right? Yeah, it's similar, but it's not exactly the same. It kind of takes that too far.
Comes close, but not really.
Right. Yeah, and because in the Kalama Sutta, what the Buddha says, it starts off with people who haven't got any idea about Buddhism, and it says, well, this is how you start out. Yeah, reflect for yourself. Does it make sense or not? But of course, down the track, if once you become a Buddhist, once you take refuge in the Triple Gem, well, you've got to take what the Buddha says seriously. That is what it means to be a Buddhist. And this is one of the things that I always like to argue with the secular Buddhists. In a secular Buddhist here, no secular Buddhists, okay. By secular Buddhists, I mean some people who deny some of the things that the Buddha said, right? Some of the people who deny some of the things the things that they consider religious in the Buddha's teachings, like rebirth and that sort of thing. Yeah. And I would argue with them, well, if you are going to call yourself a Buddhist, you have to take what the Buddha said seriously. Yeah, you can't just deny it just like that. And if there's one thing the Buddha said, it is that there is rebirth. Yeah, it is kind of one of the foundational things in the suttas. And if you reject that, you're certainly rejecting the word of the Buddha, and then you have a problem. So, yes, initially, of course, we use our common sense, we do these things, but we also understand that actually our view of the world is limited. Maybe there are spiritual masters, number one is being the Buddha, who may have a broader view than us. So of course we have to take this seriously. Okay, now this is quite a nice one. Chaos is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence. Yes, we have yes over there, yes, okay. Do we have any naysayers in here, or is everyone on board with that one? It's close, right? It's very close to the thing, yeah. So I would say, if you agree with this, I would say it's within acceptable bounds of agreeing with this one. But it's not quite right, because the Buddha doesn't say things are chaotic, because things arise from causes in Buddhism, so things have a certain structure to them. They're not kind of random. If you suffer, there's a reason why you suffer. If suffering arose because of chaos, you could get rid of it. It's precisely because it comes out of cause that we can overcome suffering. That's the whole point. Happiness comes from causes, insight comes from causes, etc., etc. This is good fun, isn't it? Like quiz night, isn't it? This is kind of a different kind of. Okay, here's one. This is this. I don't know if I can say this, but it goes like this. Chill, homie. You need to let that shit go.
He said that.
He said that. So it's close, yeah. It is not entirely. But it's a little bit disrespectful, I think, to the Buddha to put those words in his mouth. Right? It's kind of a little bit on the to my mind, but it's not necessarily wrong. This is again a matter of translation. But you don't, if someone speaks like that, would the Buddha speak like that? Probably not. Yeah, it would be I don't think Buddha is too formal, but it's also not too informal, right? He finds a kind of middle way. Everything in Buddhism is about the middle way. So probably in this case as well. Okay, here's the last one now. Have compassion for all beings, rich and poor alike. Each has their suffering. Some suffer too much, others too little. No. So there you are. So that is just to give you some ideas. Yeah, it gives us some ideas. So it's not that hard. And all of you already have a pretty good clue, and that means that a lot of people will get fooled by these things. I don't know, you all consider yourself super knowledgeable about Buddhism, or are you medium, average knowledgeable? Yeah, well, you got it right, yeah, so you must be doing pretty well. So that's kind of marvelous. But now I want to go to a kind of a slightly deeper level of this whole thing, and that is to ask, what does the Buddha say about this? Because the reality is that the Buddha lays down certain clues in the suttas, in his own discourses, about how to decide what is real. And the way he does this is he does this in his very last travel. Because the Buddha's very last travels was when he was walking from Rajagaha, the old capital of the Magadhan kingdom in ancient India, which later on became the largest empire in India under King Ashoka. And he was walking from there. That was kind of one of his bases in ancient India. And he was walking there, and he was walking towards his final destination, Kushinara. How many of you have been to India? To these places? Yeah, okay, yes, Dad, yeah. Okay, a few of you, okay, great. I've been there a few times myself, and it's very interesting to go and visit these places. So he was walking, this is a long distance, hundreds of miles. I'm in the US now, hundreds of miles, not kilometers, miles. And he was walking along, and he knew that he was coming to the end of his life. And that seems to be one of the powers of a Buddha. He knows that kind of his energy is used up, and he tells his disciples, 3 months from now, I'm going to pass away. And because he knows this, this is the time to kind of lay down the last teachings, right? And obviously, a very important part of that is to remind everyone what those teachings actually are. Yeah. So there's a lot of it's one of my favorite suttas. And it's not even a sutta, really. Why do I say that? Because the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is this particular sutta, is really it's a narrative, it's a story. Yeah? Usually a sutta is like a delivery by the Buddha, where the Buddha gives a teaching. And this is like a conglomeration of many small teachings set in a larger, broad narrative. Yeah? So it's not really a teaching in any ordinary sense. But still, it is very interesting precisely because of the narrative and the historical elements and all of this. So the Buddha is walking, starting in Rajagaha towards Kushinara. And then he starts to tell his disciples what they're supposed to take as the real teachings. And of course they are very interested. And one of the things that he says, which is very, very important, after my passing away, there is no leader in the Sangha. And that is kind of significant. It's really significant, because it means that if there is no leader, well, it is really the Buddha is kind of still in charge, or maybe he's not in charge. Even the Buddha didn't really consider himself to be in charge, which is kind of fascinating, because being in charge is like, it takes a bit of self to see yourself as being in charge. The Buddha kind of I just teach the Dhamma and then see what happens. It's almost like that. Don't quote me on that one. Another fake Buddha quote, right? So what does he say? And one of the things that he says, that after my passing, your teachers will not be any single person or anyone specific. It shall be the Dhamma and the Vinaya that I have laid down. That is your teaching. That is where you should take your refuge. That is what is important. So what is that Dhamma and Vinaya? And the Dhamma, of course, is the Buddha's teachings. All the discourse that he has given over a long period of time, that is the Dhamma, and the content of those discourses. And the Vinaya, what is the Vinaya? And if you ask the majority of people today, they say the Vinaya, they say, that's the kind of the Vinaya Pitaka. These are the kind of where the Buddha talks about the discipline of the monastics and kind of how you function in the monastic society and these kind of things. But no, actually that's not what it means, because that is a later development of that term. In the earliest days, there wasn't any Vinaya, but the word Vinaya occurs from the very beginning, but there wasn't any, the rules were barely starting to form at the very earliest period, right? But the word Vinaya existed from fairly early on. Moreover, the word Vinaya, Dhamma Vinaya, is used in general for various kinds of religions. They all had a Dhamma Vinaya, but they didn't have rules, or that kind of thing in the same way as the Buddha gradually developed. So Dhamma Vinaya is just a spiritual teaching, and the spiritual teaching has two sides to it. Dhamma being the teaching, and Vinaya being how we put the teachings into practice. So it's like theory and practice. That is really my understanding of Dhamma Vinaya, how it is used in the early suttas. And then that kind of makes sense. So the Buddha said, okay, you follow my teachings and the practice that I have laid down for you. This is what you should follow in the future. Very practical and very useful advice. And where do you find that? Well, we're going to get back to that in a second. Another thing that he says is, and this is also kind of very interesting, he talks about where to take your refuge. You can imagine the Buddha says he's about to pass away and everyone is kind of getting really upset. Venerable Ananda goes to him and says, please say something. You're going to die. We don't know what to do. We're desperate. But I mean, you can imagine, right? What actually happens if the greatest spiritual, the Buddha is about to pass away? You can see why people might get a bit desperate. What do you think if Venerable Sudaso is going to pass away? That's bad enough, right? But imagine if the Buddha is about to pass away. I mean, my own teacher, Ajahn Brahmali, to me, he is my kind of one of my big heroes in this world, and I respect him enormously. And if he's going to pass away, very bad news, not least because it means more work for me. That's kind of a very big part of it. But it's like, that's not, but it's because the inspiration is there. Yeah, Ajahn Brahm has this incredible ability to inspire you. And you have never been to Bodhidharma Monastery, most of you. Some of you, very few of you have. But when he gives a talk to the Sangha there, the monastic community, and he kind of teaches, and he kind of gets into the right mood, he gets into this kind of samadhi mood, it's like really, really powerful, and you cannot help feeling still yourself. Just the vibe, the juju is so powerful. You see, I know the local lingo here, the juju. I've learned this on this trip to America, it's kind of interesting word. So it's very powerful. So you can imagine, yeah, and they feel that their refuge is disappearing, yeah, that kind of thing. So the Buddha then says again, where you should find your refuge after his passing away. Yeah? And what he's pointing to is, very interestingly, a set of teachings called the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, which are called maybe the 37 aids to awakening. That's the translation by Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, you may probably have heard of, many of you, yeah, one of your local American monk heroes in this area, right, in New York, right, just next door. And so 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, what are these 37? And these are, just to give you a quick idea, that the Noble Eightfold Path, the 7 factors of awakening, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 spiritual powers, the 4 bases of spiritual power, the 4 satipatthanas, the 4 mindfulness meditation, the 4 right efforts. That's 37 if you count it all up. Did you count it all up? Yeah, it is 37, right? Trust me on that one. And what are they about? And if you start to analyze those 37, you see at the core of what they are about mental development. Yeah? The core is the right efforts, the satipatthana, and the samadhi. These 3 things recur in this set something like 7 or 8 times, these 3. And the rest are also important, but they are a little bit more on the edge. This is the kind of the core, the critical part of what Buddhism is about, the Buddhist teaching about development of the mind, yeah? Cultivation of the mind is really what it is about. Now that is very, very helpful to know, because if you know that this is the critical part, and then you start to read some of the later aspects of Buddhism, like the Jataka tales. Yeah? Have you heard about the Jataka tales? It's kind of the old stories about the Buddha was supposed to be in past lives, right? Yeah. Nice stories, but not so much about cultivation of mind in there, yeah? So maybe this is not part of the 37 Bodhipakya Dhamma. Okay, let's put this to one side, yeah? So probably not the teaching of the Buddha. And we know that for many other reasons as well, but this is one way of kind of deciding that. What about Abhidhamma? Actually, Abhidhamma is just kind of long lists of kind of various mental factors and how these mental factors relate to each other. Not very practical, not really sure how to use this. Yeah. So okay, maybe. So let's just put this Abhidhamma to one side as well. And just using that idea that it is about cultivation of mind actually is already very helpful for having some idea what is the word of the Buddha. Did I offend anyone here by saying the Abhidhamma might be a bit dodgy? Because if you say it to the wrong kind of people, they get offended actually. You have to be careful what you say sometimes. So.
I'm a Mahayana Buddhist but I don't have much of an affinity with Abhidhamma and studied it.
Yeah, Abhidhamma is kind of, Abhidhamma is not really about Mahayana Buddhism anyway, so that's fine. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. But you can, the thing is that it's interesting whether you're Mahayana or Theravada or early Buddhism or Hahayana. That's Ajahn Brahm's school, Hahayana. You know that one. So whatever school you are part of, we still have a lot of things in common, right? And that is what is interesting. So it doesn't really matter what kind of how you define yourself. And even if you believe in the Abhidhamma, good thing you came with, and you have a chance to correct your views a little bit. Oops. That's Mara trying to stop me. Mara wants us to believe in Abhidhamma, right? That's what So this is another kind of way of thinking about this that the Buddha lays down for us. Now the very last thing that I wanted to point out, this is also from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta of the Buddha's extinguishment, and that is where he says that when we want to decide whether something is the word of the Buddha, we should ask ourselves whether it fits with those discourses we already know are the word of the Buddha, right? And so, and it's not just anything that we should look at in this way. It is when something is said to already be the word of the Buddha, yeah, and that's not enough. And then we should take that thing which is said to be the word of the Buddha and compare it to those things that we know with a fair amount of certainty is the word of the Buddha. That's what we should do. And all other things that we know are not of the word of the Buddha, well, actually that we should just leave altogether. That's kind of completely irrelevant. That's really what he's saying there. And then we should include those things into the Sutta Pitaka or whatever we have. There's a very high standard high bar to clear here. Yeah? It has to be said to be the word of the Buddha. Someone has heard that in the presence of someone else who is very knowledgeable, and then we compare it to the suttas as we already have them, and then we can make a decision as to whether this is the real teachings or not. So it narrows the field down a lot, and it kind of brings us back to, well, what actually is the word of the Buddha? Because this is the critical thing. This is the gold standard. This is what everything else should be measured up against, the word of the Buddha, because that is the one thing that we have to have some confidence in. Otherwise, none of us would be here. Yeah. So this gets me back to the question, well, how can we know that? And I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'll give you some basic ideas of how we can know what is the word of the Buddha from a more kind of theoretical perspective, and then I will end off talking about that from a more practical perspective. So how can we know what is the word of the Buddha? And actually, it is not as hard as it may sound. And one of the ways that we do this, a very simple way, is that to recognize that the word of the Buddha has been passed down in various different schools of Buddhism. And these various different schools, one is then called, what is now called the Theravada school, and there are other schools called like the Sarvastivada school, Dharma school, Mahasangika schools, and then these schools had sub-schools, Mahishasaka schools, and all of these schools had at one point their own collection of suttas, right? And then they started to separate, and for historical kind of records, we know that separation very likely started around the time of Ashoka. Probably started before that, but that's when it had a lot of momentum. And Ashoka, he ruled in India about 2 centuries after the Buddha. And that's when these things started to spread out. So because they started to spread out at that particular point, that's when these schools were established, some in the north of India, some in the south of India, vast geographical separation between these schools. And that's when they started to form their own scriptures, because of that separation, the scriptures would have recited slightly differently, maybe they remembered slightly different suttas, etc. So they had different canons. One had a Sanskrit canon, someone else had a Pali canon. Eventually that Sanskrit canon was taken to China, got translated into Chinese. So you also, if you want to be a really good Buddhist scholar, you have to know how to read ancient Chinese, or I think they call it Middle Chinese. So even I ask people who can read Chinese characters, and they say, we don't understand ancient Chinese, this is too difficult for us. So you have to have specialist scholars to read these kind of things. But what is very interesting about this, if you take these various scriptures that separated maybe 200 years after the Buddha, and you compare them, what do you find? And what you find is that the same suttas, the same kind of basic structures, the same categories, 5 khandhas, 12 factors of dependent origination, the jhana formulas, various things like mindfulness of breathing, it is almost indistinguishable in certain cases. Sometimes there are additions, sometimes words have been kind of changed a little bit in one and not the other one, there's small changes, but very often it is almost exactly the same. That's kind of astonishing. They are some of the most important things in the Pali Canon. I consider it important because it's found everywhere. Because it's found everywhere, it's very important. That's the way I look at this, and so do many others, by the way. Some of them are verbatim. You basically can't distinguish one from the other one because it is kind of step by step, exactly the same. And that's kind of extraordinary when you see that. Most people are not aware of this. So you take the ancient Chinese, you compare it to the Pali, and you have some suttas in Sanskrit, some in Tibetan language, some in Gandhari language, some in various Prakrits, these are the vernacular languages of ancient India, some in other languages, yet again, that you've probably never heard of. Well, you've probably heard of Uyghur. Uyghur is one of these kind of groups in India, right? There's language like Khotanese, languages like, what else is there? Sogdian, it's like kind of language that died out a long time ago. We only know because of historical records and that sort of thing. Yeah? And we take all these sutras and bring them together and look at them, and lo and behold, very often they're very similar. Sometimes they are not. Sometimes there are additional sutras in one place, another one. But if we take the common core between the schools, we arrive at something that is very close to the time of the Buddha. Isn't that kind of interesting? I find that kind of extraordinary, and it gives me a lot of faith. What we have today, we not just believe in the sutras because someone has told us this is the word of the Buddha. We have historical evidence why this is the word of the Buddha. But it goes further than that, because what this points us to is that all the various schools of Buddhism were very conservative, right? That is why the scriptures have been kept intact in that way. When we talk about 200 years after the Buddha, we're talking about we were still in the oral period of transmission, because early on the sutras were transmitted orally, and they were only written down maybe 400 years after the Buddha. So we're still in the oral period, and so we know that even the oral transmission was incredibly faithful. So they are very conservative. Where does that conservatism come from? Well, obviously it must come from the tradition. If all the schools are conservative, it must come from the common tradition. So we have every reason to believe that conservatism goes back in time, all the way back to the time of the Buddha. What do we find in the sutras? What we find is the Buddha says you should recite these things, You should come together, make sure the meaning is kept, the letter is kept, that there is no divergence, and if there is divergence, this is what you should do to make sure it is sorted out. So, everywhere we look, we see this emphasis on being conservative. We see this emphasis on keeping the tradition alive from the time of the Buddha. There was obviously a great respect, a great veneration of the Buddha as an extremely powerful and interesting spiritual master. And because of that, they wanted to keep the word of the Buddha. So this is... wow, time is going fast. Okay. I usually, when I was young, I could speak incredibly fast. Yeah, but forget I speak very fast again, because, okay, come back to kind of more kind of Buddhist gradual speech. That is better. So what else? And this is just the beginning. I think this is in many ways the most interesting part. But there's many other things that point in exactly the same direction. And one of that is linguistics. If you look at the sutras, they are linguistically and literary very different from later Buddhist teachings. Yeah, the language is different, the vocabulary is different, the grammatical endings are different, the ideas expressed are different. The style is different, everything is different. If you read, and this is why reading ancient languages is actually important, because when you can read the Pali, and I can read the Pali, I've translated a lot of Pali myself, when you can read it, you can see that linguistic difference. Do you read, you can read some of these ancient languages, is that right? Some of it, okay. Okay, good. So you said that you're on the right track. Okay. So, and the Venerables here can also read quite a lot of Palis and translators as well, so that's kind of marvelous. So and this is one of the, I think, the dangers in much of modern academic studies of Buddhism, is that there is very little emphasis on linguistics and understanding languages. And when that is missing, you are not able to see what is bleeding obvious if you know the languages. Some of the early scholars of the Pali text, like Thomas William Rhys Davis, who was kind of one of the pioneers in translating and making these texts available through the Pali Text Society. He was an English gentleman, living back in the Victorian ages, back in the late 18th century, 19th century, late 19th century, and he said, he read Pali every day, and he said it's kind of bleeding obvious what is what, because the texts are so different. So there's many different approaches that point in the right direction. And I was just having a discussion with someone just the other day, because sometimes I discuss a little bit with people online. We have a kind of a platform that is really cool for discussing these kind of things. And sometimes we come across words, and many people with different kind of knowledge come into this discussions. And then there was a word that we were disagreeing with. There's this word is anda in Pali. Does it mean blind, or does it mean dark? That was a discussion, right? And the truth is that the word means both, depending on context and time and all these kind of things. And then you need to decide, what does it mean here, right? And one of the interesting things that you discover is that words tend to change meaning over time. And by comparing the change of words over time in other texts outside of Buddhism, you can actually start to stratify Buddhist texts based on these kind of things. And I just saw that the other day, and I thought, wow, this is really cool. I'm going to talk about that when I come here. That's what I thought, and now I'm talking about it, but now I'm finished with it. So this is just, I can't talk more about it. I wish I could talk more about it, because it's very interesting. But what I want to do now, come to the most important part of my talk, yeah? Forget everything I said so far, now comes the real thing, yeah? Are you ready for this? So this is straight from the suttas, not to mislead. I'm going to read it out of the suttas. So these are two cases where the Buddha, in one case, is teaching Mahapajapati Gotami. Do you know Mahapajapati Gotami? Heard now? She was kind of one of the main bhikkhunis, one of the main nuns at the time of the Buddha. She was actually Buddha's foster mother, and then he ordained her later on, and she became like the leader of the bhikkhunis in many ways. So this is where she comes to the Buddha, and she asks him, give me a teaching in brief. How do I know what is the real Dhamma? That's the one sutta. The next one is to Venerable Upali. When Upali was one of the kinsmen of the Buddha, and he gets a similar kind of discussion with the Buddha. So this is how it goes, right? So Gotami, this is the Buddha speaking to Mahapajapati Gotami. You might know that certain things lead to dispassion, not to passion, to being unfettered, not being fettered, to giving up, not to accumulation, to few desires, not to more desires, to contentment, not lack of contentment, to seclusion, not to company, to energy, not to laziness, to being unburdensome, not to being burdensome. You should definitely bear in mind that these things are the teaching, the training, and the teacher's instruction. So this is one way of defining what is the real Dhamma, And you can see it's pretty profound, It's kind of, most of this is like, way down the path somewhere. It's not just about being kind and nice, and that's part of it, but it kind of goes a long, long way down the path. It's about dispassion, not passion. So what does it mean, dispassion? This is not I don't really like this translation, dispassion, because the word Pali is raga and viraga, and this means like really powerful desires in the world, So in other words, the teaching is about not desiring things in the world, That is what this teaching is about. So again, it's this profundity. It's about going beyond our ordinary vision of what is important in life. Everything in our lives revolves around the five senses. We wake up in the morning, you are immersed in the five senses. From the moment you wake up to the time you go to bed, and lo and behold, you dream about these blooming five senses as well. You can't get away from these five senses. And the Buddhist teaching is about withdrawing from these five senses. That is where samadhi happens, when you withdraw from these things. That is why it is about dispassion. It's about giving up, at least temporarily, the desire in that entire realm. Actually, dispassion goes even beyond that. That's enough for most people already to turn away from Buddhism. Being unfettered, not being fettered. What is it that ties you down in the world? What is that holds you back in the world? Again, very, very profound, because what that means is that it is a kind of saying something about why the monastic life is kind of a freer life, right? I mean, I'm a monk. It kind of sounds a bit dodgy when I kind of praise the monastic life, but So fettered means kind of that freedom where you are completely independent of the world around you. You don't have relationships. You stay by yourself in the kuti in the forest. You do like Ajahn Brahmali. You go on has anyone here not heard about Ajahn Brahmali? There's always someone who hasn't heard about him. You haven't heard about Ajahn Brahmali? Ajahn Brahmali.
I met him.
You have met him? Oh, so you have heard about it. Good. Okay, good. You are in the club. Really? Okay. You're extra welcome to you now, sir. Nice to have you. So, but anyway, so he went on a 6-month retreat, right? And he didn't speak to anyone on the 6-month retreat. On one occasion, he saw one of his monks because he has ordained all his monks. And And he looked at him and he said, I can't remember the name of that monk. He completely let go of the monastery here. And then after he came off his retreat, he gave a talk. It's called 6 Months of Bliss. That was the name of the talk that he gave there. And he was like, when he saw him, he was like, wow, what's happened there? So this is the idea of being unfettered, right? The ability to live in this way for long, long periods of time because you don't have any ties anymore. It's radical stuff, right? And even the seeing that this is possible, it opens up a window to a different reality. How is this possible to do this? Well, the only way this is possible is because you find your happiness, you find your meaning somewhere else than most people. So it opens up a kind of window and you start thinking, wow, if this is possible, there's something in this world that is incredibly interesting. And not only does it give you an alternative happiness, but it gives you happiness that is far more profound than anything you can find in ordinary life. And that's why when you read some of these masters who really are exceptional, you see that they have a happiness, they have a contentment, they have a degree of energy that most of us can only dream of. And sometimes, of course, you have to be careful. Watch people over a long period of time before you make up your mind whether someone has the goods or not, so to speak. But I have no doubt, what I have seen in my life, that there are people who really are exceptional. And they, like Ajahn Brahmali says, sometimes he says, like, when you get into deep state of samadhi, you feel like a nuclear reactor. I don't know what that feels like, but, it sounds good. I'm not sure if he knows either, but it sounds kind of cool. So this is kind of what the Dhamma is about. You can start to see that there's something very profound here. It leads to away from accumulation to non-accumulation. You're giving up things. You find freedom in not having stuff. One of the things that the arahant, the full enlightened person, is talked about in the suttas is someone who cannot live the household life. Because if you live the household life, it is really about accumulating. It's about having stuff. It's about kind of having the fridge gets kind of well stocked and that kind of things, right? The arahant doesn't want to have a well stocked fridge, right? He just wants to walk on arms around and receive whatever they get. Because having a well stocked fridge is like a burden for the arahant. Don't want that. So this is one of the things you find in the suttas. So you give things up. You want to kind of get rid of things. That's kind of what they are about. Fewer desires, not more desires. Contentment, not lack of contentment. Contentment is a very beautiful thing. And it's something I really would recommend you to develop in your life. The idea that actually I've got enough. I can get by. I don't need any more than what I have. And obviously in monastic life it is very, very important because without contentment it's going to be hard to live this kind of life. The Buddha has this beautiful simile in the suttas that you should be like a bird with the wings as its only burden. The bird with the wings as its only burden. In the same way, the monastic should fare through their life with the robe, the bowl, and the laptop as the only burden. I'm not living up to the standards, right? I have to confess, I'm not kind of... I shouldn't really throw away the laptop. It's a bit embarrassing, but that's I'm not kind of not quite there yet. But it's just a very nice sentiment when you read that. And there are monastics in the present day who really live up to that standard. It's very beautiful and inspiring when you see that. You can do that also in lay life, at least not anymore, right? Good enough, okay, this relationship is good enough, my house is good enough, etc., etc. And then you kind of carry on from there. Contentment, it's a sign of the real Dhamma. Seclusion, not crowding. I'm not sure if we're living up to that standard tonight, but anyway. So seclusion just means that sometimes you withdraw a little bit, you hang out by yourself, maybe you come down to our meditation monastery in Perth. Have you been to our meditation monastery in Perth? You're missing out. No, I am just joking. And it's a very beautiful meditation monastery, and if you want seclusion, I don't think, I didn't mean, I mean a meditation center is what I wanted to say. It's a very nice meditation center because you get your own room, you have your own bathroom, this kind of thing. That's quite rare in meditation centers. So if you ever want to come down to Perth, it is the opposite side of the world, but if you can deal with that, then of course we'll be very, very happy to see you down there. If you can get the space on the retreat, that's the only problem. It's really, really hard to get all those retreats. Anyway, good luck. So Then we have energy, not laziness. Yeah, if you practice the Dhamma in the right way, you get energetic. This does not mean necessarily that you put forth effort. What we mean by energy is the inner, natural energy that comes when you are happy, when you are joyful. Yeah, you wake up in the morning, you feel yay, energetic, you're happy, and all these kind of things. I'm sure some of you will know that feeling. Yeah, even though some of you probably use your iPhones too much to feel energetic in the morning, perhaps. But sometimes, yeah, it's beautiful when that happens. The energy is there. It's a kind of natural thing, that the buoyancy of the mind. And being unburdensome, not being burdensome. You can see here this is very monastic, yeah? You're not burdensome on the people around you. You are happy with the very simple things. You're content with the way things are. I'm going over time now. Very last one. I said I was going to say the one about Upali. I'm just going to read it out for you. It's very much in a similar vein, but even more profound, if anything. Upali, you might know that certain things do lead solely, only, right, to disillusionment, dispassion, cessation, peace, insight, awakening, and extinguishment. You should definitely bear in mind that such things are the teaching, the training, and the teacher's instruction. Disillusionment means disillusionment with the world, right? Chuck it all out, no need for that. Dispassion again is the idea of not having a desire for all of these things that are impermanent, unreliable, climate change, political instability, wars, everything seems to be happening right now at one go. So we kind of very obvious the world is out of control. Cessation, the ending of things, this is what we're trying to do in meditation. Cease as much as possible. Peace, upasama, the deep stillness that you can find in meditation practice. Insight, this is abhinya, the profound insights of understanding rebirth, understanding karma, seeing awakening, experience itself. Then the awakening, and last of all, extinguishment. Extinguishing the world. Getting rid of the defilements, that's the first extinguishment. And the last extinguishment is the extinguishment of all suffering. Achieving the highest happiness in the world. That is the final part of this. All right.
Namayang Dhamma Kataya Sadhu Karang Dharamase Sadhu 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 Anumodami.
Okay, wow, that's pretty powerful. Okay, so that is just a little talk for you. There's too much to say about this topic. It was too large. When I first got the topic, I thought, I don't know what to say about this. And before I knew it, I had too much to say. I really got it, so it's kind of really interesting. So, does anyone have any questions or comments or anything like that? Yeah, please.
Thank you so much for the talk, Ajahn. My question's about getting my views checked out, like you mentioned. I'm curious about the quote, the doors of the deathless are open, Brahma. I've found myself being drawn to the individual of Brahma Sahampati. Is he a character that's in the early suttas?
Yes, he occurs in a few places. And I think whether that particular quote is authentic is a bit uncertain, because that particular sutta has a few parallels where that doesn't actually happen, which is interesting, right? There's at least one parallel where it doesn't happen, and that is in the Chinese translation. So whether Brahma Sahampati comes down or not, that is kind of uncertain. But the idea that there are such beings in general that are what is called Brahmas, they've been reborn in like a jhana realm or some kind of Brahma Vihara realm, I think that is kind of quite obvious, right, that such beings exist. And then we give them a name. We might as well give them a random name. Sahampati will do, right? Okay, we'll call it Brahma Sahampati. And that's kind of... I think that is very often the case, because the name is not important, because they probably don't have names, right? They're kind of blissed out. They're too busy being blissed out to have names. So they probably don't have those names. And I think this is also why you find in the suttas, you actually find quite a few of the Vedic deities, the deities that existed, that you find in the Vedas, in other words, the ancient Brahmanical scriptures, you find them in the suttas. And I think the reason because the idea of deities, of gods, that exists in the suttas, and the name is completely incidental. It doesn't matter what they're called. The names are made up by human beings anyway. They're probably called something completely different. When you go to heaven, you don't use those names. It's different names. So I think that is what's going on there. Yeah, the names are actually quite irrelevant. What matters is that there is a class of beings of that kind who are enjoying bliss or whatever. Yeah.
May I clarify my view?
Yeah.
I was under the understanding that he was an anagami from a previous Buddha.
Yeah.
Is that seen in the early suttas? Is there always an anagami who comes to request the Buddha to teach?
It is a very interesting discussion, and I've discussed it with Ajahn Brahmali many times. Because this is the kind of argument that Ajahn Brahmali makes, is that when you become enlightened, you're so peaceful and so still that you need somebody to kind of get you going, to kind of get your mind kind of moving again. And do I agree? I'm very afraid of disagreeing with Ajahn Brahmali. If he says something, I think, okay, I better be careful what I say. In this case, do I agree with him? I don't know. I find it. I would never reject anything Ajahn Brahmali says out of hand, except very occasionally. But in this case, I'm not sure. I think it is possible, especially because you have that other sutta from the Agamas in Chinese, where it doesn't have that particular part, is not there, and the Buddha just decides to, okay, let me kind of sweep the world with my mind's eye and see if there are beings with little dust in their eyes, and see if I should, and then compassion arises. And once compassion arises, of course, then he finds the motivation to teach. So so not sure. That's kind of the answer. Yeah. So sometimes not sure is okay. Yeah. So, please. You're all quiet. Yeah. Okay. So. Does anyone have any stupid questions? Sometimes more. Yeah, please, fire away.
Thank you, Ajahn. I guess this is a big topic, but belief. I struggle with belief and its place in my life and in Buddhism in general. Could you speak briefly on that?
Sure, yeah. So I think sometimes I prefer the translation confidence in Buddhism rather than belief. Because I know a lot of people in our Western world, we're kind of fed up with faith, that kind of stuff, because we've had so many difficult encounters with kind of the faith that some of us used to have. I never had any faith because I grew up in a kind of non-religious family. So I think confidence is often a better translation or a more useful translation than the idea of faith or belief. And the idea is really that, well, a lot of the things in our life are based on confidence. When you go to school, your teachers will tell you certain things and you take it in for good reasons. Why should they lie to you? They want your best, and they're going to teach you whatever has been handed down through generations or whatever. You take it on board in confidence. The Buddha is the same. Here is someone who is your teacher. But as you start to read the word of the Buddha, and as you start to kind of get a feeling for who the Buddha is, it is kind of natural to start to think, well, actually, this teacher is a bit more impressive than my normal teachers. There's something about this one is kind of, wow, it's pretty outstanding fellow. I shouldn't call him a fellow, he's pretty outstanding. And so you start to realize that actually here is someone very special. If I have confidence in my ordinary teachers, and here is someone who obviously says there is rebirth, at the very least I should have some openness of mind about this. I shouldn't close it off. And this is where I have a problem when someone says that, okay, I'm a Buddhist, but I reject rebirth. Well, I say, well, at the very least be open to the idea, right? Because if you reject it, basically you have rejected the awakening of the Buddha. If you have rejected the awakening of the Buddha, then are you a Buddhist anymore? And that makes things very problematic. So that's what I would say to people. Okay, have an open mind at the very least. See where things take you. Then investigate the suttas. Listen to people give explanations about these things. See what happens in your own practice. Over time, you will start to feel that maybe your meditation works. And you follow the technique the Buddha laid down. Okay, maybe there's something to this. And then we start to have some, I think that's the kind of right attitude. It's very important in our life that we don't take the kind of contemporary Western ideas about the world too seriously. A lot of our contemporary ideas, of course, if something is scientific, of course we should take it seriously, right? But what I'm saying, we need to make a distinction, we talked about this before today, we need to make a distinction between scientific truths that you have arrived at, right? Some of the understandings of the laws of nature, these kind of things. We need to distinguish scientific truth from the opinions of scientists. That's two very different things, right? But a lot of the things in our contemporary culture are not scientific truths, they are opinions of scientists. And one of those examples is the idea of materialism, the idea that mind somehow emerges from matter. This is an opinion of scientists, or a philosophical fashion, whatever you want to call it. It is not something that actually is a discovery in the world. And once you kind of make that distinction, then it opens up ways of looking at the world that are quite different. And then things like rebirth start to become potentially possible. So we should always look for truth. Right? That's really, really important. And in Buddhism, we shouldn't kind of stick our head in the sand and say, okay, that's too hard for me to kind of deal with. I don't want to see that. No, we should always look for truth. And wherever truth is to be found, we should accept it. If it's found in a scientific realm, then we should accept it there. If it's to be found in the inner contemplative realm, we should find it there. So truth is always important. But we need to be very careful. We don't kind of buy into something that actually has nothing to do with truth. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Bhante. It's very enlightening conversation. I'm a little short of hearing, so to be honest, I didn't hear everything.
I guessed that already, yeah.
That's actually right.
Yeah.
It is very good because even when it comes to the belief that we think of, the first of the noble eightfold samadhi. This samadhi, they say, has to be protected on either side by samma sati, mindfulness, and on the other side, samma vayama, right effort.
Yeah.
Those two are in the third seven factors of enlightenment. It's called Sattva Dhamma that you mentioned actually. The first two is sati, and the second one is effort, mindfulness and effort. And then of course Vipada, and it goes on. And it goes on as what you call Pancha Indriya and Pancha Bala. And that Pancha Indriya also has a concept of
right view.
Faith or proper confidence in the Dhamma. And that once it goes to the Pancha Bala, although it is not mentioned in after that, it is like almost a foundation to have confidence in the Dhamma. Because even the Pancha Nivarana, the five, the fifth one is Vichikiccha. So once Vichikiccha is removed, only when you have the Saddha. So it's very, very important. All these things work together. It's wonderful. It's really, most people don't realize it.
Exactly. 99.99%.
We say our mind is running right. That's papancha. Mental proliferations. Those don't come necessarily from the six senses right away, but they are gone into storage and.
We should invite you to give Dhamma talk here one day.
How well 2,600 years ago.
It's very interesting what they say about the right view and how right effort and sati kind of revolves around right words. That's from Majjhima Nikaya 117, the Mahachattarisika Sutta. And it's a very important point. And of course, this idea that right view is at the beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path is very important. So the outlook that we have actually matters. Why does it matter? Well, it matters because what really right view is about at the end of the day, it is about being able to distinguish happiness and suffering. That's really what it is about. And if you have right view, that's why if right view, your mind goes into meditation very easily because you know where happiness is to be found, and your mind goes away from the suffering, which is, from a Buddhist point of view, basically the five senses. So really, that is what it comes down to: understanding happiness and suffering, and then to develop that distinguishment between happiness and suffering, you need to be mindful and you need to apply effort. You need to reflect on the word of the Buddha. You need to reflect on your daily experience. And as you do that, that right view gradually gets established. Right view is not something that is either on or off. I believe in rebirth, got right view, done with factor number 1. No, it is nowhere near as simple as that. Yeah, it is something that you develop over time. So you keep on contemplating, you keep on with sati and virya and padana, the effort, and then you kind of gradually get there. Yeah. Good.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, very nice to have you here. All right, so you know you don't get to see me very often, you know, so this is your chance to ask difficult questions. You're very welcome to ask super duper difficult questions and see what happens. Dan.
What is moha?
What is moha? Okay, so you want, okay, one word answer? Delusion? No, they don't want one word answer. So moha is a word in Pali which is usually translated as delusion, yeah? And so what is that? Well, it kind of has a number of different depths to it. But the one of the more superficial depths is that moha is the thing that makes you make bad karma. So the 3 roots of bad karma, lobha, dosa, moha, yeah, greed, hatred, and delusion. Yeah. And from a sense of karma perspective, it is possible to make good karma. It's possible to have amoha. So in that context, it means something fairly shallow. Yeah, it doesn't mean deep delusion. It means kind of maybe tiredness, lethargy, restlessness, mind which is kind of a bit out of control, whatever. It means those kind of things, lack of clarity maybe. So that is kind of the superficial idea of moha. But moha also can be considered as a synonym for avidya, which is like ignorance or also delusion very often. And if it is a synonym for that, well then it means the kind of the root delusion of the Buddhist path, which is the delusion of a self. Yeah, I would say that's kind of where that's the kind of the bottom delusion. That is the delusion that supports all other delusions. So I would say that it can be divided into those 2 categories. I would say the idea of moha. Yeah.
So how did you get rid of it?
How do you get rid of moha? Gradually, slowly. So I'm not finished. You can come later on. I just want to. The thing about moha is that the Buddha talks about avidya and moha, and he talks about actually how to get rid of it, because he talks about the supports of avidya. What is it that supports delusion? Well, it is the 5 hindrances. Yeah, the 5 hindrances are basically the defilements of the mind. So by reducing the defilements of the mind, your mind loses, the moha goes down. Yeah? So this is kind of the initial stage of getting rid of moha. So by practicing well, by living a life, good life, according to the 5 precepts, according to kindness, generosity, doing a bit of meditation, being a more compassionate and loving person. We need more compassionate, loving persons in this world. There's too much kind of bad things happening, yeah? So we need, at least we in the Buddhist community, we can be more compassionate and kinder. And so by living like that, you are actually already reducing your moha. That's kind of the power of this. And then there comes a point when your mind is completely pure, and that's where you can actually have real insights, deep insights, and that's where you can kind of overturn moha or avidya as a kind of final overturning. Yeah. Very good. Did you? Sorry. Let's give a few other people the chance first of all. Did you want to?
I have a question. I have a question about your meditation instructions. It's a 2-part question. The first was you said don't rush to the object, your mind object, too quickly. Because it'll create tension. That was great because I already went to it too quickly. I was already tense. Okay. So when you said it, I did back off. So my question was either you could elaborate about that, or to ask why is it that we're so tense when we jump on our meditation object so quickly? And then my second question is when later on you said don't reach out for the breath, let the breath come to you at the moment that you know is right.
It's the same thing. Those 2 things are the same thing actually.
And I wanted to ask why, because you followed it by saying that reaching out for it, the action of reaching out disturbs our peace.
Thank you for that question. I'm very glad you asked the question. It's a very, very good one. Because this is a very common mistake as far as I'm concerned in meditation practice. Meditation is used, if you go to the breath too quickly, the only way you're going to be able to stay with it is through willpower. And when you use willpower, it's going to become unpleasant because you're holding on to it, you're grasping it. Yeah, that's what you probably experienced there. Yeah, it was unpleasant. So because of that, and this is what the Buddha says in the suttas. When you look at the Anapanasati Sutta, which is the sutta on mindfulness of breathing, he says establish mindfulness first. Yeah, and people don't do that. They don't establish mindfulness first. The idea for many Buddhist meditators is that you establish mindfulness through meditation, when actually, really, mindfulness should come first and then comes meditation afterwards. This is like the real meditation we're talking about now. It doesn't mean that you can't meditate. You can meditate before you have established mindfulness, but you cannot meditate on the breath. You can't do that real meditation, if you like, right? You can relax, you can wait, you can guide your mind in certain directions, etc. But you should not go to the breath until mindfulness has arisen. And so this is why I'm saying that you kind of wait, you allow the mind to calm down, you focus maybe on the feelings in the body, that's kind of a grounding kind of thing, or you just enjoy the peace of sitting here, whatever it is that you kind of works for you at that time, and you allow things to calm down, and you just stand back, and you're just aware, and you notice your mind going in various directions, right? And then as things calm down, you reach a degree of clarity. When clarity is there, then the breath tends to come with that clarity. Suddenly the breath is there. The breath comes to you. You haven't reached out for the breath. Because the breath is part of our experience. It is always there in a sense, but sometimes our mind is too distracted to see it. When mindfulness arises, the breath tends to come into view. So you wait, you just stand back, So just wait. The breath may even be there initially because you're so used to grasping the breath. But if the breath is there from the very beginning, almost pretend not to see it, Just kind of relax and not worry about it at all. Just let it be, otherwise attention will arise again. So this is what it is about. So in the long run, the Buddha says there are two supports for meditation, two things that are important. And those two things are sila, your morality, your kindness. I prefer kindness as a translation of sila, because morality is far too narrow. And the other one is ujjukatiti, right view. We just talked about right view before. Because right view means that you know where happiness is to be found. If you know that the world is not that interesting, you're not going to think about it. You're going to go to the breath instead, once the mind is kind of clear. So right view and sila is what makes us feel good about ourselves. If you live really well, you can have a sense of self-worth. You can have a sense of self-confidence, even, a sense of self-esteem, because you know that you're a good person. No one needs to tell you that. You know it inside, right? And so I really recommend everyone to focus on that aspect of ourselves. Actually, when you're living well, the Buddha said we shouldn't think like this. When you're living well, you should. It's okay to feel good about yourself. Not in a big ego kind of way, but in a quiet, peaceful way you feel good about yourself. And that feeling good about yourself means that the present moment is the pleasant moment. Ajahn Brahmali catchphrase, right? The pleasant moment is the present moment. The present moment is the pleasant moment. So because you want to be, you feel good about yourself, why do you want to be anywhere else? There's no, no need to be anywhere else. And then that is how this happens. So that's my answer. Are you okay with that?
Okay,
Yeah?
thank you.
Okay, great. There was someone in the back there who said something. Yeah, please.
So unless I'm allowed to come late on Wednesday, which I don't want to push, I won't be here for the talk, which is kind of on this question.
Yeah.
As mostly Mahayana practitioners and the traditions I'm most familiar with, they don't really emphasize entering deep absorptions or samadhis. So I thought it would be a nice question to ask for you, the importance of that and what's required of a practitioner who's serious about it to be able to access those sort of things.
Yeah, becoming a monk is a good start.
Something I've considered though for over the years.
Oh really? Okay, that's great. That's interesting. That's like gave the right answer maybe. So that's good. It is much easier as a monastic, and lay people can do it, but it's not easy because as I said, it's a little bit about mentally you're going to have to give up the world, right? That's really what it means to get samadhi. So that's quite hard to do it mentally, but not in life. Well, there tends to be a contradiction there. But sometimes you can do it. I met some very impressive lay people in my life. I mean, really, really impressive. It's like, wow, they're more monastic than the monastics sometimes. I mean, it's like, whoa. And but anyway, let's kind of come back to the basics here. So how important is samadhi? Well, it is very important. It's part of the Noble Eightfold Path, right? And in Mahayana Buddhism too, if you kind of go to those suttas, it will be part of the path, and they probably should emphasize samadhi, right? And so because it is part of the path, then to kind of edit it out is kind of really kind of distorting the teaching of the Buddha. Second thing that you then have to do, basically you just have to fulfill the first 6 factors, the first 7 factors of the path, and as you fulfill them, then the 8th factor will eventually come into view, and then you'll be able to reach the samadhi. Yeah? So you have to start with the beginning, right view. The beginning is often the most important part. One of the kind of extraordinary things that you see in the suttas is how the path is kind of automatic. Meditation happens without the will, the Buddha says quite literally. It happens as a conditioned sequence. Yeah? One thing leading to another one. And the root cause in this conditioned sequence, says the Buddha, is sila, is morality, is kindness, is how we live. And that includes also right view as part of that. So that is the foundation. If you get those incredibly purified, and I know Mahayana is into that kind of stuff, yeah, really purify your sila, your metta, your compassion. Yeah, these are very important Mahayana qualities. If you do that fully, then you will get into samadhi like nobody's business. Bang, samadhi just happens. So that is really all you have to do. And then you can come to the breath, and you watch the breath, and the mind just, like a well-trained dog, just walks into samadhi, and you're in business.
We're technically out of time.
Okay, regarding the question of the moha, one of my friends once told me, Ravi, isn't lobha, dvesha, moha, greed, aversion, and ignorance or moha.
Yeah.
Isn't greed and aversion also part of moha? So I clarified that with Bhikkhu Bodhivan, and I asked him, I posed it as a question, and he said, that's correct. It's all this is due to like ignorance but because greed and aversion, it's very, very predominant in our life. So they have separated that as lobha and dvesha. But moha is technically underlies all in a way. And that's why even in the 10 dasa sangyojana, the 10 fetters, the last one is avijja, ignorance. So it is that we have to get rid of with the wisdom and enlightenment. We learn every day, Bhante. Thank you.
Good, well done. Yeah, excellent. I would agree with you. That's moha is the root problem, and actually lobha and dosa, they arise out of the moha. Yeah. Venerable Siddhasa, it's up to you whether I'm happy to go on a little bit longer if there are more questions. It's really up to you. You're in charge. I'm just the slave tonight.
So Ayasama's in charge, and Ayasama says to keep going.
Keep going. Okay. All right.
I'm Italian. I don't have a sense of time. So.
I do. I started to get uncomfortable about 7 minutes ago. In her mind, there's no problem, so we can keep going.
All right. So so please.
I heard this translation come up in a group, online group, and I was having difficulty with it. I've heard the term revulsion. Revulsion, and I looked up the term revulsion, and it was related to a feeling of disgust or a feeling of hatred, and it was I felt confused about how to cultivate revulsion in the practice while also having kindness and metta and compassion. Yes. Right.
Don't cultivate revulsion.
Oh, okay. Is that the wrong? Is that the wrong word?
Well, it is not necessarily the wrong word, but it is way down the path. And what it really means, the Pali word you talk about is nibbida, and nibbida. It's like the way the sequence goes in Pali. You go samadhi, yata buddha nanadasana, nibbida viraga. So samadhi, deep meditation. Yata buddha nanadasana, knowledge and vision according to reality. When you see reality, remember what you see is dukkha. And if you see dukkha, you turn away from it. That's what it means by revulsion. You're turning away. Oh, I can't stand it. It's just too painful to watch. It doesn't mean hatred. It doesn't mean anger at all. It means the turning away from it. You can call it aversion or turning away revulsion is a very strong word, as Ajahn Brahmali uses. He's the one, that's his word actually. He used that word, and he is the one who suggested to Bhikkhu Bodhi he should use it in his translation, and Bhikkhu Bodhi got a lot of flack apparently for doing that. Many people didn't like it, it was too strong. But you have to understand it in context. Context is deep insight, turning away from the world, nibbida. It's like you go to a cesspit, you come to a cesspit, you're kind of on the edge. Am I going to jump in? No way. You got nibbida, you got aversion and disgust for the cesspit, you turn away. So, that's the idea. So it's sometimes translated as aversion. The word I translated today as disillusionment is the same word. Disillusionment. Sometimes disenchantment is used. Disenchantment is a very weak word, right, compared to revulsion. Right, as a kind of two opposites of the scale. So this is why it's useful to sometimes see different people's translations, because it gives you an idea of the breadth of the meaning sometimes of these words. Great. Yes, please, at the back there.
I guess I have two questions. Thank you for your talk. I
That's one
struggle
question.
with monkey brain during meditation, like the chatter in the head. And I have two questions. The first one is how do you overcome that chatter, that ongoing? And the second one is if you could explain your understanding of emptiness of inherent existence, like what it is to be empty.
Okay, so how do you overcome the chatter? Well, you. One of the things is you have to see its causes, why it arises, and you will normally see that it arises for two different reasons. One is because you have an interest in those concepts or ideas that you're thinking about, you think they're important, or meditation is just so boring and dukkha that you rather think about stuff, right? So this is very common. I don't mean to kind of say anything bad about you. I understand this is very common, right? Very common in the world. And so the way you overcome that is that you, first of all, this is where this idea of right view comes in. This idea that actually those things I'm thinking about, they aren't that important. We solve our problems in the life in meditation. Everyone has solved problems in meditation. Because once the mind becomes a little bit more peaceful and clear, wow, the power is there to solve problems. Yay, I'm going to solve problems now. And then you destroy your meditation as a consequence. So it's such a common thing. So you need to understand that actually the real solutions are not found in solving the problems of the world because they are endless. The real solutions are found in becoming peaceful in meditation. This is what I mean by right view. You understand where the mind, what really is important, what matters. And so then the mind will automatically withdraw from that world. It won't have any interest in those things anymore, and you think less about it. It's easy to say, hard to do because it takes a lot of understanding and what's going on. But that's basically what it comes down to. The other thing, the thing about when the mind kind of goes thinking because actually you're not really enjoying the meditation, well, the way to overcome that is to enjoy the meditation, right? That's really the way to overcome it. And so you just have to train yourself to see the pleasure in what is going on. I remember in Perth we had a retreat, and we had this fellow who kind of, he was a funny fellow, and he said that, you wouldn't believe the sort of thoughts I've been having in my meditation. I've been thinking and after a while I didn't have anything more to think about. And when I didn't have anything more to think about, it got crazy. I just did my washing, and I had my shirt on the line, and I was thinking, what is the optimal way of hanging the shirt on the line so it dries the quickest? Is it this way, that way, is it front, back to front, which way is the sun coming from, which way do you turn and this kind of thing. So it was kind of, this was what he was doing in his meditation. That's kind of a sign of desperation. You have to think of something, anything better than nothing. And that is because you're not really enjoying it enough. So first of all, learn to see the happiness that is already there, and there is going to be some happiness available in terms of peace, in terms of just relaxing, whatever it is. And then gradually learn to build up deeper kinds of happiness in your meditation, greater degrees of stillness. And as these things come together, it will start to work, and it will start to come out eventually. Have you had sometimes, occasionally, peaceful meditations, or? There you are.
I very much so enjoy meditation. I'm someone who overthinks, and I have a hard time slowing down. There are times where I'm able to slow and focus on the breath, and I feel really good. But there are other times where I can't quite slow my brain down.
I think you're in very good company. So So the second part of the question about emptiness, and what does it mean that there's no empty of inherent existence? And it just means that if you keep on investigating your mind, you won't find any, you won't find any equivalent to the feeling I am. Everyone has the feeling I am, but the deeper you know, the deeper you look inside, you won't find any counterpart to that feeling, and you start to understand eventually that feeling itself was a mistake. That's kind of what it's about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ajahn?
Yeah.
I was wondering if I could get your thoughts on something a little bit technical, but for practical reason. In the Sanya Vidgiti Nirodha Samapatti, the cessation of perception and feeling. In the Mahaveda Sutta, they talk about how the difference between death and life, the difference between that and death, Padinibbana, is the life faculties are still there so that consciousness can re-arise. So the reason I ask about this is because it seems when grasping ceases a little bit, consciousness can kind of stop. But my question is, where is the stream of consciousness? Where does it go? How does it re-arise? How is life kind of relevant to that, in a sense? Is kind of what I struggle to. Why does it re-arise again when there's life there?
I think it is just the same reason why you become arahant, you carry on until you die, right? There's some connection. As long as the physical body is there, the consciousness cannot cease. That kind of holds it together in a certain way. So how does it work? And this is getting very technical perhaps, but I think the way it works is that it's like you enter that state with a certain momentum. That momentum has only so much force to it, and when the kind of momentum comes to a stop, then it re-arises again. It's like a jhana experience. You go into jhana, and it is maybe a perfectly still experience, but you enter it with a certain amount of energy or momentum, so it only lasts for so long. When the momentum is finished, you come out of it. So it's similar to that, And then the mind, it's like a stopping momentum, if you like. It's kind of weird kind of reverse momentum with a stopping momentum, and then when that stopping momentum comes to an end, then you come out again. I don't know any other way of explaining it. That's kind of that's what Ajahn Brahmali told me originally, many years ago, when I asked him pretty much the same question, 25 years ago, whatever. Yes, please, at the back there.
Getting back to the monkey mind, would it help to sort of be with it or be mindful of it and sort of watch it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very. I think that is often the kind of the basic technique. Because the reason why it's there is because we're feeding it all the time. And the reason why we think is because we want to think. It may sound terrible, but that's actually the reality, right? We actually want to think those thoughts. So the intention is there, and but once you're just observing, you're no longer intending, because observing, being passive, is the opposite of intending. Intending is doing, being passive is not doing. So the more passive you are, the more that mind will tend to settle down by itself. But it's hard to be passive. That's one of the things, right? And that's kind of the issues there. So that is one of the ways of doing it. But in the long run, you may need kind of more powerful ammunition than just being passive. So you kind of a bit of right view, a bit of passive, a bit of joy. All these things kind of coming together, you stir it all up, and bang, it starts to happen. Please at the back there.
Well, could you please go through the logic of the world as endless problems, but then retreating for 6 months and forgetting about the world, but then feeling someone comes to you with a problem, and then you have compassion and get motivated to work on stuff again or share Dharma? Do you hear me?
I sort of, so.
Could you go through the logic of the world has endless problems, and then sitting still and retreating, and then someone coming to you with a problem again? Because the whole world, we're how can you feel still when you're connected to the whole world and it's full of problems that are endless?
Well, I think the point there is that you withdraw, and then through that withdrawal you detach from the world, so you have no longer any interest in that world. When you come back again, But you still have an interest in helping people because people have suffering, right? So the world doesn't interest in the sense that you want to get things from the world, but you have compassion because you know the suffering in the world. And because you have got that perspective through meditation that you have built up through those 6 months on the retreat or whatever, suddenly you have the ability to help people. That's kind of the miracle, yeah? Through that withdrawing, through seeing things clearly, through seeing that actually that the world there is no cure for the world, right? That actually is what enables you to then guide other people in the right way. So there's a difference there. The difference is the world, and then there's people who suffer, and that's kind of the distinction. Something like that. You want to come back on that one? You're right? No?
I'm satisfied.
Is that okay? Great. Wow. Wonderful. Excellent. Okay. Please. Yes.
My question is about Buddha's simile about that samya being like a mirage. I was hoping you could, whether you could elaborate on it. When you think of a mirage, you're seeing something that isn't there. That was my understanding of it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful simile, and that sutta is one of those really nice suttas, the Penapinda Sutta, the form, that's what I call in Pali, the Kanda Samyutta. But yes, the idea is that perceptions are just inherently changeable. They are not really, they are something that has been conditioned into you, but it is not really real. I look at you, and when I look at you, I think friend, because you're here in the crowd. Someone else might look at you and say, not friend, right? Depending on who it is, Or someone might look at me and say, okay, friend, and someone else might call me an enemy because maybe I say too many controversial things or whatever. So what is the true perception? Is there any truth to this perception that we have about the world? Is there any reality there? One day you are depressed, the next day you're happy, but the world is the same. The people around you are the same. It's just your perception has shifted. You're seeing something else than you saw before. So these ideas that we have about the world, they don't really have any inherent reality to them. There's nothing there which is stable and certain and reliable. It's always changing. And this is why it is possible to change things like having ill will. The reason that we have ill will towards people, we might think of someone as a bad person. This person, I don't like them because they are difficult or bad or whatever. But then you change your outlook on that person. You don't see them as bad anymore. You see them as conditioned. They're conditioned the way they are. Actually, they can't help themselves. I should have compassion for them because they can't help themselves. And suddenly, instead of having ill will, you have compassion. And the only difference is just a change in attitude inside of you. Which perception is true? Which one is false? There isn't any truth. They're just different ways of looking at the same thing. And so it is that's why it means it's a mirage. There's no essence to these perceptions of ours. They're changeable, and this is what makes the path possible. If that wasn't possible to change our perceptions, there wouldn't be any path. This is how metta, loving kindness, comes about. This is how compassion comes about. This is how renunciation comes about. How we perceive things in the world. Yes. Okay.
At home, I talk about death quite often until my children and my husband ask me that, why are you talking about death all the time? and to me, it's the way that you prepare yourself and also remind yourself that every day that life go on, then you should do something good for your next life. But I cannot explain it to them in the right way, and he sits back there. Could you please explain?
I hear this all the time as one. Please explain to my kids, explain to my husband, explain to my wife. This is the most difficult thing of being a monk. I can tell you, this is really this is whoa. But I think the thing is that one of the kind of difficult things about having close relationships with other people is that when we think we have good ideas and those people will not listen to us. It's like when I became a monk and my parents, my brothers, they wouldn't listen to me. I said, the Dhamma is the best, listen. And they wouldn't listen, they would kind of walk away, be quiet, you're just a fanatic or whatever. And they didn't say it quite nicely. And then I thought, okay, but I've got to have a different approach here. My approach, I'm going to be kind instead, right? Instead of kind of teaching them, just be kind, don't say anything, be kind. And so I did that, and I started to be kind to my parents, and I said, what happened? What a miracle, this rebellious teenager, now he's changing completely. And there's something about kindness that opens people's hearts. It really opens people's hearts. And my parents, my father, became almost my disciple after a while. That was really, really weird, right? It's very strange because usually a father is the one who tells you what to do, He doesn't kind of listen to you. And so my father said to me before he died a few years ago, well, actually, now you're my teacher, I used to be your teacher, and I was turning around there. That's kind of very powerful. And I think it came when I realized that I realized that very quickly, actually, that instead of trying to proselytize or kind of convert my parents, they didn't have any religion anyway, just be kind, do it through actions. And that's how other people teach, other people learn. And so don't try to teach yourself the death contemplation, and then your husband, maybe he will enjoy, maybe he will kind of learn down the track, maybe he won't, maybe he's just different from you in that sense. Maybe he doesn't enjoy the death contemplation, I don't know. But I happen to agree with you. I agree with you that death contemplation is actually very important and very significant, and it's something that the Buddha teaches in the sutras. And he actually says that anyone who is serious about spiritual practice should do death contemplation. And the reason is really quite simple, because once you have this idea that you're going to die, it puts everything else into focus, in a sense, into that context of dying. It's a very important context. But it's not just the fact that we're going to die, but it is the fact that we don't know when we are going to die, right? So now is the opportunity. And that is really the critical thing here. And if I think that I could die, when I go to sleep upstairs, or as soon as I finish this talk, bang, I finished it, then it means I'm going to be kind to you. The thing is that once you know that you're going to die, do you want to have an argument with somebody the last thing before you die? That's kind of crazy, right? Who wants to have that? So it actually makes you kind, it makes you caring, it makes you compassionate when you have the idea of dying. And that is the point of it. And so it enhances your spiritual qualities. If you find the idea of dying too frightening or too confronting, well then, okay, maybe don't do it. Or, say I'm going to die in a year's time or whatever. Put it off to a long, long way away, and then bring it closer. But if you can't deal with it, I would suggest for anyone who wants to be a better person, it's actually a very good way of becoming a better person. It's also very good because the dying process is very similar to the meditation process. So if you get into the idea of dying, you can also get into the idea of meditation, because dying is a process of letting go. You have to let go, right? There's no choice. Meditation is also about letting go. So you can use the idea of dying to help you in meditation. And not only does it do let go, but usually on your deathbed you tend to gain clarity. And someone who dies well, they become clear on the deathbed. And clarity and letting go is a combination that is often hard to get together. Either you let go, you fall asleep, or you kind of become clear, but you're tense. But you want to get on that middle way where you're relaxed, letting go, and have clarity. And that is what happens to a good person on the deathbed. So again, it can be very useful for that as well. Yes, please. Please tell me when to stop here, because I go for it.
Mine is not a question so much as a follow-up on my way of dealing with certain aspects of death. So, and I don't know if it's right or wrong. It's just what I do, and it's probably not the right.
I will tell you.
If I have a situation where I'm feeling really uncharitable towards somebody, and I want to say some really harsh words, or worse, want to do something not very charitable to them, sometimes I think, what if that person were not there tomorrow or day after? Would I still want to feel this way towards them? And that changes it. I know it's a horrible way to think that somebody might not be there, but it's a way that I cope with anger.
I think it's great. I think it's a wonderful way of doing it, actually, to be honest with you. Because it shows you when time is short and people are about to die, we want to do the right thing. Yeah, and that's exactly what it was about. So no, excellent. Yeah.
So
great.
I cannot be mad at him anymore?
Don't be mad. Never be mad, right? That's the kind of the wrong way. So anyway, no, that's great. So maybe we should stop there. We've been going on for a long time. So yeah, marvelous to see you all. There's going to be another talk on Wednesday, is that right? Yeah, okay, so if you wish to come back on Wednesday, you have a chance, you're very welcome to do so. But for now, we're going to... So how do we end the sessions?
So we can end by paying respects to the teacher by bowing 3 times. So we'll bow together.
Okay, nice to see you all. Look after yourself, practice well, and I wish you all the very best.